All right. So we're going to dive into this case that's, got everyone talking about the murder of the UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. And, it's not just the crime itself.
Right.
It's the online reaction that's really got people, scratching their heads.
Absolutely.
And you sent over a whole stack of articles and reports. So let's break it all down and try to figure out what this whole thing says about.
Hey, what this whole thing says about us.
Us.
Us, yeah.
It's fascinating how this case seems to be tapping into so many different anxieties that people are feeling right now. Anxieties about healthcare, about corporate power, about, the way information spreads online. It's almost like this murder has become this Rorschach test for our collective fears.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, shot and killed on a New York City sidewalk.
Tragic.
On December 4th.
Yeah.
And the suspect, Luigi Mangione, 26 years old.
Young guy.
Prominent family.
Yeah.
Ivy League education. Arrested in Pennsylvania.
And not just arrested. They found him with quite the collection.
Oh, really?
A gun, fake IDs, cash.
Wow.
And a handwritten document that seems to express some serious rage against corporations in general.
Okay.
But there's also this phrase.
Okay.
Deny, defend, depose.
Deny, defend, depose.
Yeah, found on shell casings at the scene.
Interesting.
And on those wanted posters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like they're everywhere, right?
They've been popping up all over New York.
Yeah.
It seems like a pretty clear link to insurance industry tactics.
Yeah, it's like something right out of a, crime drama.
Right.
But then you go online, and instead of the expected shock and outrage, you've got this weird mix of reactions.
Yeah, that's a weird mix.
I mean, some people are even calling him a folk hero.
It's crazy.
What's going on here? It's disturbing, to be honest.
Yeah.
This tendency to romanticize a suspect in a murder case.
Right.
Especially when it seems tied to his appearance.
Right.
The whole hot assassin label.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
The fan art, the memes.
It's wild.
It's a stark reminder of how we can sometimes prioritize looks over the gravity of the situation.
I get that.
Yeah.
It's like we're so bombarded with images and information that we lose sight of the fact that there's a real person at the heart of this tragedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brian Thompson, by all accounts, was a well-respected individual.
Yeah, he was
The current CEO of UHC even referred to him as one of the good guys.
Yeah.
In an email to employees.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's crucial to remember that, especially amidst this online frenzy.
Absolutely. But I think it's also important to understand why people are reacting this way.
Why they're reacting this way.
Yeah. It's not just about looks.
Right. It's not just a superficial reaction.
There's this eat the rich sentiment.
Eat the rich, yeah.
That's been bubbling up for a while now.
Absolutely.
And this case seems to have tapped right into that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's not just a superficial reaction. There's a deeper frustration at play here.
Right.
And I think a lot of it stems from the state of healthcare in the U.S.
Okay.
You've got sky-high costs, coverage denials, people struggling to get the care they need.
Right.
It's a breeding ground for resentment.
And you see that reflected in the articles you sent.
Right.
Stories about people like Jen Coffey. Who had to sell almost everything she owned.
Oh, my goodness.
To pay for medical treatment that her insurance wouldn't cover.
Yeah.
I mean, it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
And you can see how that kind of experience could fuel some serious anger.
Of course, these are real people facing incredibly difficult situations.
Right.
And their frustration is understandable. But the question is, where do we draw the line?
Right.
Experts are calling this a dangerous normalization of violence. And I think there's a real risk of copycat actions.
Yeah, that woman in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Who was arrested for threatening insurance agents.
Right.
Even using that deny, defend, depose phrase.
I know.
That's pretty chilling.
That's chilling.
But is this really a turning point?
Yeah. Is this a turning point?
Or is that an overreaction?
I mean,
does an online outrage
fade
pretty quickly?
Well, that's the thing about the internet.
Yeah.
It can amplify and accelerate these kinds of trends.
Right.
The NCRI, which is a group that studies online extremism, is actually comparing this to the online reactions to mass shootings.
Wow.
The concern is that we're seeing a mainstreaming of extremist views.
Okay.
where the lines between online venting and real-world violence become increasingly blurred.
Okay. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, it's scary.
And it's not just about the suspect and the victim anymore, right?
Right. This has a ripple effect. Exactly.
So we're already seeing increased security measures across a range of industries.
Makes sense.
Companies are tightening up, holding virtual meetings.
Right.
Even scrubbing executive info from their websites.
Wow.
It's a natural response, but it raises questions about corporate transparency and accessibility in the long run.
It also makes me think about the employees caught in the middle of all this.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to forget that corporations are made up of individuals, real people, who are now dealing with the fear and anxiety caused by this heightened security.
That's a really important point in that email from the UHC CEO. He actually included messages from customers.
Oh, really?
Expressing support for the company and its employees.
Oh, wow.
One person even shared how their cancer treatment had been covered by UHC.
Oh, that's nice.
It's a reminder that there are real human stories on all sides of this.
And it's easy to lose sight of that in the midst of all the noise.
That's such a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the outrage and forget that there are real people dealing with the fallout of all this.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this case so unsettling.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that even in the face of a horrific act, our reactions can be shaped by pre-existing biases and frustrations.
Yeah, it seems like this goes way beyond a single crime.
It does. It goes way beyond.
I feel like this murder has cracked open a whole Pandora's box of societal anxieties.
Exactly. And now we have to figure out what to do with all of that anxiety.
Yeah.
All of that fear.
Well, that sounds like a perfect place to pick up in part 2.
Right.
We'll be back to unpack even more of this complex case right after this.
Sounds good.
So I think it's worth unpacking some of the specific criticism that have been leveled at UnitedHealthcare.
Right.
Because let's be honest, they didn't become the target of this much anger by accident.
It's true. They have a history.
Right.
And some of the most common complaints revolve around claim denials.
Okay.
People feeling like they're paying for insurance, but can't actually get the coverage they need when they need it.
Right.
Then there's the tension with hospitals and healthcare systems. Disputes over costs and coverage that ultimately trickle down and impact patient care.
Right.
And, of course, looming over all of this is the issue of cost itself.
Right, because it's not just about getting the coverage.
Right.
It's about being able to afford it in the first place.
Exactly.
I mean, premiums are skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Deductibles are insane.
It's tough.
Feels like a system designed to squeeze people at every turn.
It's a system under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And that pressure seems to be manifesting in some really troubling ways.
Right.
But here's where things get even more complex.
Okay.
While it's valid to critique UHC and acknowledge the very real frustrations people have with the healthcare system, we also can't lose sight of the individual at the center of this tragedy, Brian Thompson.
Right, because it's easy to get swept up in the wave of outrage and forget that a man lost his life.
Right.
And from everything we've read, he seemed like a decent person.
He did. And this is precisely why this case is so unsettling.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that even in the face of a horrific act, our reactions can be colored by pre-existing biases and frustrations.
Right.
The victim, in some ways, becomes less about who they were as an individual and more about what they represent.
But wouldn't you say there's a danger in dismissing all criticism of corporations as just bias or frustration?
Absolutely.
I mean, holding powerful institutions accountable is important, right?
Absolutely. Criticism is vital.
Right.
Especially when it comes to systems as large and impactful as healthcare. But this case highlights the potential for that criticism to morph into something more sinister, particularly in the online echo chamber.
It's like that saying, the internet is where nuance goes to die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Complex arguments get reduced to sound bites and hashtags.
Right.
And in this case, we're seeing a dangerous blurring of lines between legitimate criticism and the glorification of violence.
Right.
Those wanted posters circulating with names and faces of health insurance executives.
Oh, yeah, I saw those.
It's a chilling reminder of how quickly online rhetoric can escalate into real-world threats.
And the woman in Florida who was arrested for making those threats.
Right.
Even using that deny, defend, oppose phrase.
Yeah, it's like she took those online sentiments and turned them into action.
It's a worrying trend.
Yeah.
And it raises the question,
Right.
is this truly a turning point?
Yeah. Are we witnessing a shift where online outrage is more readily translating into real-world violence?
Right.
It's a question that the NCRI, the group we mentioned earlier, that studies online extremism, is grappling with right now.
So given all of this,
Yeah.
where do we even begin to address this? How do we unravel this knot of anger, fear, and frustration and actually prevent future tragedies?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Some argue that the solution lies in healthcare reform.
Okay.
Creating a more equitable and affordable system that addresses the root causes of this anger.
That makes sense.
Right.
If people feel like the system is working for them,
Yeah.
they're less likely to be driven to extremes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you have others who point to the role of social media,
Okay.
arguing that we need stricter regulations to curb the spread of misinformation and hate speech.
So essentially tackling the problem from both ends.
Yeah.
Addressing the systemic issues that create the frustration
Right.
and the online platforms that can amplify it.
Yeah.
But aren't there downsides to both approaches?
Sure.
I mean, healthcare reform is incredibly complex. And social media regulation raises concerns about censorship.
You're right. It's a thorny issue.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
All right.
But that's precisely why it's so important to have these conversations.
Right.
To examine all sides and to consider the potential consequences of each approach.
It feels like we're walking a tightrope here.
It is a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And this case has thrown a spotlight on just how difficult it can be to navigate.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes it so important to engage with this issue thoughtfully and compassionately.
Right.
To remember that this isn't just about abstract concepts like healthcare or corporate power.
Right. It's about the human element.
Exactly.
The victim, the suspect, their families, the people struggling with healthcare costs.
Yeah.
The employees caught in the middle.
Exactly. This case touches all of us in some way.
Right.
And we have a responsibility to engage with it in a way that honors the complexity of the situation.
We'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Where we'll try to untangle some of these threads and explore what this case might mean for the future.
So
don't go anywhere. We're back, and, as we've been talking about this case, there's this one word that keeps coming back to me. Fear.
Fear is definitely a dominant theme here.
Yeah.
It's driving those increased security measures, shaping the way people are reacting online, even influencing how we're talking about these issues.
And it's not just the fear of violence, right?
Right.
It's the fear of financial ruin because of medical bills. The fear of not being able to get the care that you need.
Right.
The fear that the whole system is rigged against you.
It's a multi-layered fear.
Yeah.
And it can be paralyzing.
Right.
It can make us reactive instead of proactive. And it can cloud our judgment.
Right.
Making us more susceptible to extreme ideologies or, those quick fix solutions that don't actually address the underlying problems.
So how do we move past that fear?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. How do we channel all this energy, all of this anxiety into something constructive?
That's where I think critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
We need to really dissect these complex issues, understand the different perspectives at play, and try to avoid getting swept up in, those knee-jerk emotional responses.
Which is easier said than done, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in the age of social media where outrage and oversimplification tend to dominate.
It's a real challenge. But I don't think it's insurmountable.
Okay.
We have more tools than ever before to be informed and engaged citizens.
Right.
We can access information from diverse sources, connect with people from different backgrounds, and participate in meaningful dialogue.
But that takes effort, doesn't it?
It does.
It requires us to step outside of our own echo chambers.
Yeah, to challenge our own biases.
Right.
And to engage in good faith with people who hold different views.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not always comfortable, but it's absolutely essential.
Right.
Because if we let fear and division win, we all lose.
This deep dive has been quite the journey.
It has been.
We've gone from the specifics of this murder case to these broader societal anxieties.
Yeah.
And it feels like we've only scratched the surface.
That's the nature of a deep dive, isn't it? It's about peeling back the layers, making connections, and ultimately sparking more questions.
And this case, as tragic as it is, has really forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society.
It's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
A reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
Right.
We have a responsibility to engage with these issues, to demand better from our leaders, and to work together to create a more just and equitable world.
A world where fear doesn't hold us hostage.
Yes.
Where we replace division with dialogue.
Absolutely.
And where we prioritize solutions over sensationalism.
Well said. And on that note, we want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
Something to ponder as you continue to navigate this complex world.
Okay.
If you were tasked with designing a system that could address the root causes of this anger and fear, that we've been talking about a system that could prevent future tragedies and foster a more just society, where would you even begin?
It's a big question.
It is.
And one that deserves careful consideration.
Absolutely.
We'd love to hear your thoughts because this conversation is far from over.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.